The Department for Education is calling time on uneven funding in England's schools. And that's because a couple of years ago, central government consolidated different levels of local authority spending on schools and grants for ethnic minorities and disadvantaged pupils. All that's left different schools getting different amounts of money.
To address the problem, the Education Secretary said yesterday the budgets of around half of England's primary and secondary schools will change from April 2018.
Our proposed formula will result in more than 10,000 schools now gaining funding and more than 3,000 of them receiving an increase of more than 5%. And of course, those that are due to see gains will also see them quickly.
Now pay attention at the back as we explain what Ms Greening's done.
Right now, English local authorities get on average £4,600 per pupil. Tower Hamlets, Hackney and Newham all get more than £6,000 per pupil. And Nottingham, Birmingham, Manchester and Liverpool receive more than £5,000 per pupil. At the other end of the scale, Wokingham, Poole and West Sussex have less than £4,200 per pupil. Lincolnshire, Derbyshire and Barnsley are on less than the average. And to underline the disparity, let's look at one example in particular, Knowsley in Merseyside. Even though it gets just above the average, it has similar levels of deprivation to Tower Hamlets in London, but the local authority there spends over £2,000 more per pupil.
Don't lose focus. Let's turn to what's happening now.
Every school here from Tower Hamlets to Liverpool will now lose money, and every school here from Wokingham to Barnsley will gain. Natalie Pereira, now at the Education Policy Institute, was a civil servant at the Department for Education, where she worked on the funding formula 5 years ago. Back then, the coalition government postponed what they found to be a politically contentious issue, which has now come back on the agenda. So what's her reading of this?
The losses are definitely urban, metropolitan areas, London, Manchester. The gainers are a bit more diverse. So some rural, some a mix of rural and urban.
Is more money going into deprived areas? And if so, where's that money coming from and how is it being allocated?
There's more money going into the deprived pot, and that's coming from the general pot for all pupils. And when we look at how that pot is being spent, it looks like compared to now, there's a bit more money going into the least deprived neighbourhoods and a bit less money going into the more deprived neighbourhoods on average.
Does that fit in with the rhetoric of helping the just about managing families?
Yeah, it seems like that's what's driving, or what might be driving, this decision.
The other surprises were that this takes place over just 2 years, so quickly, and that the lump sum that each school receives is being cut by up to £65,000, which is particularly bad news for the smaller schools.
So what happens next? There'll be a 14-week consultation on the proposals and a final decision before the summer. Then councils will no longer distribute money to schools by 2019.
Which means that many of the 20,000 primary and secondary schools in England, as a result of this settlement and inflationary pressures and extra pension costs, will have to seriously consider cutting staff, increasing class sizes and narrowing their curriculum.